Your heart just stopped. In a hospital room, a monitor flattens into a single tone. A doctor glances at the clock, because soon someone will have to call a time of death. But your brain didn't get the message. For the next few minutes, the most complex object in the known universe is still running, still firing, still in some sense on. And in these final moments, it may do something it has never done at any other point in your entire life. Scientists have only ever recorded it once, by accident. What they saw suggests that dying might be the strangest experience you will ever have, so let's do something almost no one lets themselves do. Let's walk through it, minute by minute. Not the fear that comes before it, the thing itself. What actually happens inside you in the first few minutes after you die? Because the science is newer than you'd think. And it does not point where you'd expect. Start with the single most important fact, the one that changes everything else. Death is not a moment. We picture it as a switch. 1 second a person is here, the next they're gone. A line on a screen goes flat, and that's it. But that's not how the body actually ends. Death isn't an event. It's a sequence. And the first thing to understand is that your heart and your brain do not die at the same time. When your heart stops, blood stops moving. Oxygen stops arriving. But your brain cells don't die the instant their supply is cut. They can survive for minutes on what's left, which means that for a short window after your heart has quit, after a doctor could reasonably call you dead, your brain is still alive up there in the dark. Running out of fuel, but running. So what is it doing with that time? For a long time, the assumption was simple. Nothing. The brain just fades. The lights dim and go out. But in 2018, a team led by neurologist Jens Dreyer studied the brains of dying patients in extraordinary detail, and they watched the actual mechanism of a brain shutting down. Let it land. It isn't a fade. It's a wave. When oxygen runs out, brain cells can no longer hold their electrical charge. They've spent your whole life carefully pumping ions across their membranes to stay ready to fire. Now the pumps fail, and the cells release everything at once in a single massive electrochemical discharge that rolls across the brain like a tide going out. Researchers have a name for it. They call it the wave of death. Here's the part that matters. Up until that wave passes, the damage can still be undone. Restore the oxygen in time, and the neurons power back up. The brain comes back. It's only after the wave has fully swept through that the shutdown becomes permanent. That wave is, quite literally, the line between a person who can still be brought back and one who is gone for good. And it takes minutes, not seconds, to finish. But here's where it stops being a simple story about a machine winding down. Because right at the edge of death, in the moments around that final wave, the brain does something nobody expected. It doesn't go quiet. Beat it, lights up. In 2013, neuroscientist Jimmo Borjigin at the University of Michigan was studying the brains of rats at the exact moment of cardiac arrest. She expected to see the activity trail off towards silence. Instead, in the first 30 seconds after the heart stopped, she recorded a surge. A sudden burst of highly organized, tightly synchronized brain waves, specifically gamma waves, the fast, high-frequency activity your brain produces during its most alert, most conscious states. And it wasn't a faint flicker. In that dying window, the signatures of consciousness spiked higher than they were in the normal, waking, living animal. At the moment of death, the rat's brain was, by this measure, more active than it had been while alive. Borjigin published it in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, and it forced a strange question into the open. If the dying brain floods itself with the signature of peak awareness, what exactly is it aware of? For a decade, that question sat mostly in rats. Then, in 2023, Borjigin's team studied 4 dying human patients as they were removed from life support. In 2 of them, as the heart failed, the same thing happened. A surge of gamma activity. And not just anywhere, in the regions of the brain tied to conscious experience. The areas that light up when we dream, when we pull up a memory, when we feel we are someone having an experience. Two human brains at the threshold of death, switching those regions on. Which brings us to the one recording science never planned to have. In 2022, doctors were monitoring an 87-year-old man with electrodes attached to his skull. He had epilepsy, and they were watching his brainwaves to catch his seizures. Then, mid-recording, he had a heart attack and died. For the first time in history, a machine was capturing the electrical activity of a human brain across the exact instant of death. The 30 seconds before the heart stopped and the 30 seconds after. When neurosurgeon Ajmal Zemar and his colleagues analyzed the recording, they found the same signature the rats had shown. In the seconds around death, the man's brain produced a burst of gamma oscillations, the precise rhythm it would use to retrieve a memory. Zemar pointed out what that could mean. The pattern looked like the brain doing exactly what people who have nearly died so often describe, reaching back, replaying. As though in its final seconds, the mind pulls up a lifetime and runs it one last time. Your life flashing before your eyes may not be a figure of speech, it may be a measurable event. Shift, sincere, quieter. But here's the part almost no one repeats when they share this study. It was one man, one brain, and an old, injured one, scarred by epilepsy and bleeding and swelling. You cannot build a certainty out of a single case, and Zemar himself was careful to say so. A dying brain in that condition might produce those rhythms for reasons that have nothing to do with a peaceful life review. We genuinely do not know what that man experienced, if he experienced anything at all. And yet, the rats showed the surge. The 4 human patients showed the surge. And for as long as humans have been dying and coming back, they have described the same handful of things, a flood of memory, a sense of calm, a life laid out end to end. 3 separate windows onto the same moment, and they keep pointing in the same direction. That isn't proof, but it's a pattern strange enough that science can no longer look away from it. There's one more layer, and it's the most unsettling of all. Because so far we've been talking about brain activity, electricity, rhythms, waves, not awareness, not the feeling of actually being there. So the harder question is this: during those minutes, you beat is anyone home? Sam Parnia, a critical care physician, has spent his career studying exactly that. People whose hearts stopped and who were later brought back. Clinically, during that gap, they were dead. No heartbeat, no breath. And yet a fraction of them return with memories from inside it. In one documented case, a patient later described events from the room during their own resuscitation, things said, things done, while they had no pulse and no measurable reason to be aware of anything at all. Parnia's conclusion reframes the entire picture. Death, he argues, is not a switch that flips. It's a process the brain enters and, within a narrow window, can sometimes be pulled back out of. And for at least part of that process, awareness may not have ended yet. The person may still, faintly, be in there. Shift, warm, tender. So put the minutes back together. Your heart stops. For a few minutes, your brain lives on in the dark. A final wave begins its slow roll across it, the line you can still be pulled back from, and somewhere in that window, instead of simply fading, the brain may flare into its most conscious rhythm and turn inward, reaching back through everything you ever were. Not reaching out toward an ending, reaching back toward a life. If any of this is what it appears to be, then the last thing your brain may ever do is the most human thing it has ever done. It remembers. It tells you your own story, one final time, in a room where the machines have already given up. We've always pictured death as a light switching off, sudden, total nothing. But the switch was never the truth. The truth looks more like a fire going out, slowly and not without a final flare of light. Your heart stops first. Your brain, it seems, is in no hurry to follow. And in those last few minutes, alone in the dark, it may spend its very last spark of energy doing the one thing it spent your whole life learning how to do, holding on to you, holding. That's the strange thing about the questions we forget to ask. Once you've really looked at one, you can't quite look away again. If you want to keep asking them with me, I'll be here. I'll see you in the next one.